Oregon hires Ross Douglas as their new wide receiver coach. Ross Douglas spent some time with the Patriots as an assistant for about a year or two, maybe longer. I can't remember exactly how long he was there. And then he was at Syracuse this past year. Syracuse had the number one passing offense in terms of yards this past year. Even though Kyle McCord was very good, you don't you don't have that happen without very good wide receivers. So Ross Douglas, 30 years old, coming into Oregon, kind of goes along the path that we've seen with Dan Lanning. He likes to hire young, energetic head coaches, guys who can really get out on the recruiting trail, do a good job. I think Ross Douglas has shown that he can develop guys rather well, especially this past year at Syracuse. So I like that for him. But I mean, I'm struggling to find anything wrong with this hire. Not that there needs to be, but I think Dan Lanning did a really good job here and had a really good hire. What say you, Zach?
Mike Loxley, take notes, buddy. Take notes. In all seriousness, this is why Dan Lanning's a top 3 coach in the Big Ten and probably a top 5 or top 6 coach in the country. He went out, got one of the hottest coaches out there to coach his wide receivers rather than what he could have done. And I think actually several outlets noted this. They could have promoted Rashad Samples, or they could have switched Rashad Samples from running backs coach to wide receivers coach. He's a good coach, and like he could do both positions. But instead, he goes for a big splash hire, and this is a splash hire. He is well regarded in the coaching community as the next big position coach and someone they can develop maybe down the road into a coordinator. And he's good recruiting, he's good developing, and we've seen what a dynamic wide receivers coach can do. Just look at Brian Hartline at Ohio State. And Oregon has a track record now too with wide receivers. And so they've got more coming in as a freshman. There's just a lot to like about this. And it's just a reminder, Oregon's not going away anytime soon.
Sorry. I forgot to hit the mute there, or the unmute there. No, yeah, Oregon's not going anywhere anytime soon. I did check on it, so the reason why I got confused on how long he was there, he was defensive quality coach, quality assistant coach with the Patriots in 2021. Then he was the assistant wide receivers coach in 2022. Then he was the receivers coach for the Patriots in 2023. Then he was the wide receivers coach for Syracuse in 2024. So he's got like a different job every single year. But I mean, he keeps moving up, which shows that he has promise, right? Actually, was a graduate assistant at Rutgers from 2018 to 2020. So that's pretty cool coming from the Big Ten. I think the thing about this hire, though, that I like the most for Oregon, I don't like it as an Ohio State fan because I think Dan Lanning is making a good move here, but he's from Ohio, right? Like he's from Avon, Ohio. He went to school at Michigan and he went to school at Rutgers. This is a Big Ten guy. This is a guy in the Midwest who has also been out on the coast as well. There's a lot of good wide receivers coming out of the New Jersey area. And if you can get into Ohio and get some of those guys that, Dan Lanning and them have been targeting recently, it's going to be even better for Oregon to have those type of connections. I can almost guarantee you after spending time at Rutgers that he has connections with Ohio high school coaches, and he's going to be able to utilize those, if not coaches, at least administrators, enough to get his foot in the door, and it's going to be good for him and the program to have those connections out there. Again, don't like this as an Ohio State fan because I think Dan Lanning is building himself up to not just be a recruiter on the Pacific West, but he's building up to be a recruiter nationally, and it's a really good move by Dan Lanning.
Yeah, agreed. Really,
So,
really, it checks. I think it checks every box, like his NFL experience, Big Ten pedigree, uh, like just anything you can sell on the recruiting trail, and then also the familiarity, and like it's a home run hire.
yeah, and like I tried to find something about this that I didn't like. Maybe I'm not looking close enough, but I mean, I can't find anything I don't like. He was a assistant wide receiver coach in the NFL, wide receiver coach in the NFL, then went to Syracuse, then now to Oregon. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a really good hire. Dan Lanning is very good at hiring these guys. I guess let me ask you one more thing, Zach, and then we'll move on. What do you think of Dan Lanning's kind of like? I mean, this is on brand for Dan Lanning. Get a young guy in here who can recruit, who can go out, have the energy, make relationships with high schoolers, and bring them to school. Like, what do you make? Like, is he too focused on recruiting? You think? Like, does he need some older position coaches, or in your opinion, like, you have the right offensive and defensive coordinators in place? Just go get young guys who can go get you players to come to your school. Like, what's your thoughts there?
No, I think he's on track. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, they had the one seed of the playoff this year, and I think they ran into a buzzsaw against Ohio State that day. But they beat Ohio State earlier in the season. They beat the top three teams in the Big Ten. Well, top three powers in Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State all this season. And I think I think their biggest struggle right now is they've had to rely so much on the transfer portal to fill needs that actually I think their homegrown recruiting is the thing. Building their roster from the ground up, I think, has been one of the things that they've needed to do a little bit better job at. And this is a big part of it, is getting these young coaches. And so, yes, I can see why you would pose that question, because it's like, do they need to focus more on development? But I think they've developed guys pretty well. It's just they haven't had a lot of guys. They haven't had all of their guys all the time to develop. They've relied a bit more on the transfer portal the past couple of years. I think that's changing if you look at their recruiting classes over the past couple of years, and I think that'll continue to change.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, Zach, we've started the Oregon recruiting discussion, so we've got Phil Knight comments in the chat, which is fine. I'll say my thing one more time. This, and Zach, if you want to say yours, and then we'll move on. I think it's a little of both, right? Like I think I think Phil Knight really wants to see a national championship at Oregon, but I also don't think Phil Knight would just give out his money to anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as much as like Dan Lanning, like yeah, he has the benefit of Phil Knight money. Like as a head coach, you got to prove yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because if Phil Knight didn't believe in Dan Lanning to go win him a national championship, I guarantee you he would not be spending the type of money that he is. Like guys who are rich don't just throw their money around for no reason. Like that's the reason why they're rich, because they're smart with their money, and they can go out and do kind of crazy things with what they want. But he still has to trust Dan Lanning. So as much as like yeah, people want to knock Oregon for the money and stuff like that, I think you also have to recognize that like Dan Lanning is also just doing good stuff behind the scenes. It's the same thing with Ryan Day at Ohio State, right? Ryan Day, he gets money there at the program. You have to give him credit because he got the money to happen, as far as I'm concerned. But that's just me. And then also, I do think Dan Lanning puts an emphasis on hiring young guys who are good recruiters who can go out nationally and not just recruit on the West Side. But that's just me. Any other thoughts before we move on, Zach?
Just, I saw Grandpa Phil, and the first thing I thought was Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I was like, James Avery, he's sadly he's dead. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, Grandpa Phil, Phil Knight. But maybe one of the best TV dads ever, by the way, in James Avery. He's such a good actor. But that's neither here nor there.
I was say, are we gonna get into a discussion about ranking TV dads now on the podcast in the off season?
That could be a good off season. There's a really great the YouTube clip, and it's not. There's some language in it, so be forewarned. But it's Will Smith breaking down a scene between him and James Avery on that show, and it's freaking awesome. Like,
yeah,
it's such a so.